Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to do something slightly different for me and take a look at my top 10 most read authors. So I've seen this question asked a few times. It's normally done as a list on Instagram or Twitter or Discord or something like that. But I was randomly looking through my stats on Storylace and they do have a couple of different graphs there. And one of those is the most read authors in your library. So I wanted to take a quick look at them. I'm going to, with a couple of caveats which I'll touch upon when they come up, I'm going to go through my top 10 most read authors. So the authors that I have read literally the highest number of books from. I'll also take a look at whether I'm likely to read any more books from each of these authors, and because it's available on that stats page as well, I'll also take a look at the average rating that I've given to the books for each of the authors on this list. Now, according to that stats page on Storylace, I've read a total of 203 different authors. I've read 78 of those authors more than once, which is 38% of that total. And because there's not too much to say about how this will work, it's not exactly rocket science, I'm just going to dive straight in. But as a slight change from the normal kind of top 10 lists, I am just going to start at the top with number 1. So the most read author in my library is no surprise to me, it's Raymond D. Feist. So Raymond D. Feist is the author of the Riftwars cycle. There are a number of different series within the Riftwars cycle. They're normally trilogies. I think there's 2 standalones which kind of come in a sub-series, if you like, and I think there's 1, maybe 2 quartets in there as well. But I have read the entirety of the Riftwars cycle with the exception of the Empire trilogy, which was co-written by Jenny Wirtz. So that gives me a total of 27 Raymond D. Feist books. Sometimes you would see that figure as 28. The first book in the series, the very first one, was Magician, which is being released as 2 volumes. I've read it as a single volume, and like any of the other titles where it becomes applicable, I've listed them as I've read them. So whether that's split volumes or combined editions like this one. Now, I do aim to read some more Feist in the future. I've got King of Ashes on my shelf, which is the first book in a series he wrote after the Riftwars cycle was finished. And then there is also that Empire trilogy, which people keep telling me I should read. I did try it once. I put down the first book. I wasn't able to get into it. But that was quite a while ago, and maybe my tastes have changed enough for it to work for me now. I don't know. I'm not going to make myself or anyone else any promises on that. But there's definitely the potential for more Feist going forwards. Now, in terms of the scores, Storylace gives a percentage essentially. It gives a figure out of 100, and that tracks with the weighted ratings that I have on my own Excel spreadsheet for my reading tracker. There are only 2 Feist titles that I've read since I started using my weighted ratings, but I have put a number on Storylace, a kind of a rating, which is based more on gut feeling for any of the books that I did read before using the weighted ratings. So with most of them using that gut feeling rather than the weighted rating, I've got an average score of 71% for all of those Feist books that I've read. In second on my list with 22 titles read, I have Sir Terry Pratchett. I was a big reader of Discworld when I was younger. It was one of the series that I absolutely loved. I used to collect the books whenever a new one came out, or whenever I saw one that I didn't have in my collection, I picked it up. I have gone off the series a little bit, my tastes have changed, and it doesn't really work for me. The humour isn't what I'm looking for in my reading anymore, so I've not read one of these for quite a while. There is only one that I read since I've been doing my weighted ratings. That was Nightwatch, which, in fairness, I did really enjoy. It's probably my favourite Discworld novel, although that might be kind of a recency bias going into that because it was the one that I remember the most. I tell a lie actually, I did listen to Reaper Man not too long ago, a couple of years back. Didn't enjoy that one quite as much. So yeah, definitely Nightwatch was my favourite. It's one that I still recommend to people. It was a really good inventive story, it worked really well. And I think the humour was maybe a little bit toned down, and that's why it worked so well for me. The average rating that I've given to the Discworld books is 67, which is still a pretty good rating, even though it does drop below the 70s. Am I likely to read any more Pratchett going forward? I would say at this point probably not, because of that kind of evolution of my tastes. As I say, it's not really the sort of humour in a book that I look for anymore. So although I still have a couple of books on my shelf that I've not read because of combining my library with my wife's library, I would say I'm probably not going to pick those Discworld titles up. Third on my list with 16 titles read is Adrian Tchaikovsky, probably the most versatile, well, certainly the most versatile author on this list, but one of the most versatile authors working today and putting out books in fantasy and sci-fi, I would say. He's got such a vivid imagination and I love his work. So yes, this number will certainly be increasing and increasing before too long as well. So as far as Tchaikovsky goes, I've read the 10 books that make up Shadows of the Apt, one of my favourite series. I've read the 3 books that make up Children of Time trilogy, so that's sci-fi. I've then read Dogs of War, Spiderlight, the first book in Echoes of the Fall, The Tiger and the Wolf. And I think that's it, that adds up to my 16. So of these ones, as I say, I'm definitely going to be reading more. I do have some more planned in. So on my reading list, my goals for 2023, I do have Shards of Earth, the first book in the Final Architecture. I've actually moved that one back now, though I'm not going to read it this year. I'm doing a buddy read of a trilogy, so I've got the 3 books set for January, February, March 2024. So in a few months' time, I will be adding to this number. There is also then a new upcoming release. Alien Clay is released in March 2024, so it's going to be a busy Tchaikovsky kind of start to the year for me. But I don't mind that because I like almost everything that he puts out. Certainly of the things that I've read from Tchaikovsky, I've had a really good time as a general rule. Now the average rating I've given to Tchaikovsky's works is 77%, and of those 8 were rated using my weighted ratings because he's more of a recent author for me. The rest of them were some of the earlier books in the Shadows of the Apt, which I read before starting to use my weighted rating scheme. Number 4 on my list is a nice easy one to go through. This is Robert Jordan with 15 titles. So of Robert Jordan's works, I haven't read anything outside of A Wheel of Time, and I'm probably not going to. I know he's got some works in the Conan kind of franchise, but I'm not sure that it's something that really appeals to me there. So of the Wheel of Time, I've read the 14 main books in the series, plus New Spring, the prequel novel as well. The last couple of these, the last 3 in the series, were co-written by Brandon Sanderson, but it does all count as Robert Jordan because he's the main author of these works. So I would say this one's definitely not going to change. He's going to stay on 15 for me. And the average rating that I've given these books, with only I think 1 read whilst I was using the weighted ratings, is a flat 70%. Moving on to number 5, and this is one of the caveats that I mentioned at the start of the video. I've got 2 authors here, but it's an author duo, so all of the books that I've read have been by both of the authors writing in partnership, and this is Jason Anspach and Nick Cole with 13 titles on my list. Now, a few years ago, I had a bit of a reading slump and I started to read some Star Wars titles. I was looking up Galaxy's Edge because that was just coming out at the time, and there were a couple of books kind of affiliated to that sub-franchise, whatever you would want to call it. And there's a series called Galaxy's Edge, written by Jason Anspach and Nick Cole. These are military sci-fi and they're just fast, quick romps, and I actually had a really good time with them. The first couple of books didn't really work for me. I think the authors were finding their feet. The writing style really wasn't for me, but then after that they kind of settled down a bit, and I found them quite enjoyable. So of these ones, I've read the 9 books that make up the first season of Galaxy's Edge, plus there was then not quite a novella, it's just under novella length, short story called Tin Man, which is an opening, kind of a prequel to the series. And then I've also read the Tyrus Rex Contracts and Terminations trilogy as well to make up the 13 here. Now there are several other series and a continuation with season 2 of Galaxy's Edge, so there's definitely the opportunity for me to add more to this number, but I would say they're not a priority for me at the moment. Number 6 on the list is Equal Sixth. Actually, I've got 2 different authors, both with 12 titles to the name. The first of those is Brandon Sanderson, and this is one that I will be adding to. I've got 1 title by Sanderson on my list for 2023 because I'm aiming to be reading Oathbringer and possibly Rhythm of War as well, but we'll see how we go with that. So the titles that I've read here, if I can get the 12 of them lined up. First three actually of the 12 were the last three books of the Wheel of Time, because as I say, Brandon Sanderson co-wrote those or helped finish them off after Robert Jordan passed away. So I think that was actually my introduction to Brandon Sanderson. I've not read any of his work before that, and then I picked up the Mistborn trilogy afterwards, which takes me to 6. I've then got the standalones, so I read Warbreaker, Elantris, and also recently The Emperor's Soul, so that takes me up to 9. And then the final 3 I've got were from the Stormlight Archive, so I read The Way of Kings in the UK paperbacks, which was split into 2, and then I did the audiobook for Words of Radiance, so technically just 2 books in the series but split over 3 volumes. So as I said, with this one I will be reading more Sanderson going forwards. Hopefully over the next couple of months I will add to this list and start moving them up into initially joint 5th in this table. Now the average rating that I've given Sanderson's books so far is 80%, but that's based on mostly the gut feeling. I've only rated 2 of his books using my weighted ratings. The final book in the Wheel of Time, A Memory of Light, and then also Words of Radiance. Last year was it I read that one. All of the others were before my weighted ratings started being used. So the second author I've got in Equal 12 is David Gemmell, one of my favourite fantasy authors, and I've read a bunch of his Draenei books, as well as 1 or 2 others. So I think there were 9 Draenei books that I've read. I've also read Darkmoon, which is a standalone, and then 2 books of the Riganti Quartet. I didn't like the time jump, so I didn't read on after the first couple of chapters of book 3 in the Riganti, but I really did enjoy those first 2 books. Now I do wonder if this number is correct, because one of the 9 Draenei books I've got is part of the sub-series, the Chronicles, is it, of Skilganon the Damned. I do think I've read both of those books, but I've only got one of them listed, so it may be that the correct number for David Gemmell is 13, but it's listed as 12. I can't be 100% sure if I've read it, but either way, when I think it was when I first joined Goodreads back in 2013, I listed all the books and I left one of them off at that point, so I must have had an idea at that point that I hadn't read it. But certainly as far as the stats go, I'm on 12 for Gemmell. Am I likely to read any more in the future? Possibly, because there are some of the Draenei books, including potentially that Skilganon one, that I haven't read, and I did have a really good time with pretty much all of those books, so there's a definite possibility there. The average rating that I've given to Gemmell's books is 76%. That's based on mostly gut feeling. There are only 3 that I've read since using my weighted ratings. Try to remember what those are. I know one of them is a reread of Legend. One of them was Winter Warriors. I can't actually remember which the other one was, but overall they're very enjoyable books and ones that rank in my top list. So moving on to 8th in the list, that's not a skipped number, it's just that there were 2 in Equal 6th, as I say. This one is actually out of position on the list, but I'm going by how they're listed on Storylace in my stats, and the reason for it being out of place I'll go through in a moment. But with 10 books on my list, I've got R.A. Salvatore. So I've read a bunch of his Drizzt books. Drizzt Do'Urden is one of my favourite characters in fantasy, so I spent a bit of time lapping up everything that was available to me several years ago. There's been some more books released since, which I haven't got to yet. So with this one, there is again the potential for me to add to this number. Now I said he's out of place in the list. I've actually read, I think it is double the number. I've read 20 of his titles, but I've listed them in the volumes that I've read them. So one of those is the Icewind Dale trilogy. I've got a box set, so instead of listing all 3 individually, I did list that one as the kind of collector's edition. And then similarly, there are 3 or 4 of the earlier books in the Drizzt chronology that are available as bind-ups, and I do have those on my shelf. So I've got the Dark Elf trilogy, which speaks for itself. There are 3 books contained within there, but it's listed as 1. And then I've got Paths of Darkness and Legacy of a Drow, both of which have 4 books within them. So although it's listed as 10 individual kind of books or collections that I've read, there's actually 20 individual releases within there. So this is one, as I say, it's one of my favourite characters. I really enjoyed the stories of Drizzt. I have got one of them, the Neverwinter series. I've read the first one, Gaunt or Grim. Haven't read book 2, Neverwinter itself. That one is a soft DNF. I will get to it at some point, but it's kind of on the back burner. I don't know when that's going to be. In terms of the ratings, this one's kind of skewed again because obviously the average rating that I've given, or the individual book ratings, are based on those volumes rather than on the books that make up the bind-ups. So I've got 71% for R.A. Salvatore's works. 2 of those were rated using my weighted ratings, although one of them is an anomaly. It shouldn't really be on there because it's a collection of short stories. It was one of the first titles that I rated on my weighted ratings before I kind of got to grips with all of the rules and how I want to use the system. I don't rate novellas, I don't rate short story collections on there. There are, I think, 1 of each. I've also got The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Pat Rothfuss listed on there, even though I wouldn't rate it on the weighted ratings if I was to read it today. We're getting to the end of the list now, and in 9th, with 9 titles read, is John Gwynne. So with John Gwynne, I've read the 4 books that make up The Faithful and the Fallen, 3 books of Blood and Bone, and then the 2 books that have been released so far for the Bloodsworn saga. So with that one, obviously there's another book to come for Bloodsworn, so I will be reading that, and that'll increase the number. And then because I've enjoyed everything he's written so far, any books that he reads in the future, I'm sure I'll be looking to read as well. All 9 of these books have been read since I used my weighted ratings. I think Malice was actually the very first book that I used my weighted ratings for. It's either Malice or A Memory of Light. Those were the first 2 that I scored using this system. And the average rating I've given for John Gwynne's books is 89%. Pretty much all of the, well, I say all of The Faithful and the Fallen, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th books, and also the 3 follow-up books in Of Blood and Bone, all rated in the 90s for me. Malice was in the 80s, and then I think For Shadow of the Gods might have been 79, because I didn't quite like that one as much. It took a bit more for me to get into, but that was improved upon with my knowledge that I'd gained of the characters and the setting and the world anyway, but it was improved upon with The Hunger of the Gods. So really looking forward to the next book in that series, and as I say, for anything that John Gwynne puts out in the future. And then in 10th in my list, with 8 titles read, I've got the author duo making up the pen name James S.A. Corey, because I've been reading over the last few months The Expanse. So here, as I say, I've got 8 books. There are 9 books in that series. I do have Leviathan Falls, the final book in the series, on the list for September, so I will be adding to this number very shortly. There are other books available as well. There are novellas and the short story collection, I think it is, to kind of wrap up and expand upon the Expanse series. I'm not planning to read any of those at the moment. That might change, but because I am going to be reading Leviathan Falls, obviously, the overall number for James S.A. Corey will be increasing for me. All of these have been read using the weighted ratings, except for Leviathan Wakes, book 1 in the series. This one was read whilst I was in the reading slump I mentioned earlier on, and for whatever reason, maybe it was because it was a sci-fi title and I hadn't read many of those, I didn't use my weighted ratings for it. So for 7 titles that I've scored using my weighted ratings, they've come out with an average of 80%, which is a really good score. So there you go, those are the top 10 authors I've read by volume, the 10 most read authors in my library, my reading history, however you want to look at it. Let me know in the comments down below, how surprised are you by this list? Are there any names you weren't expecting to see? Are there any names you were expecting to see who didn't turn up in here? And of course, who do you think is going to be the first new person to break into this list? Thanks very much for your time today. I'll hopefully catch you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.